Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Bethany and today I'm going to share my favorite books from 2024. I'm so excited to share these with you. It's actually been really hard to select which ones I'm going to share because I have a number in my mind, the same number that I did last year, and that's 12 books. I really wanted to have 12 favorites to share with you. And I read some really good books in December, so I had to figure out how I was going to add those to my list and what I was going to take off or how I was going to figure all that out. But I have found a way to get it to 12 fiction books, and then I had one nonfiction that is really like my favorite nonfiction of the year. So I thought I'd share a few of my favorite nonfiction with you. I just don't read, or I didn't read as much nonfiction in 2024, so I can't do like 12 nonfiction that were my favorites, but I think I have 3 and definitely have a top favorite. So I do have my books kind of organized into basically 3 different genres, and they are like my favorite genres pretty much. So I am not surprised that this is what is included in my favorites. So I have a pile of historical fiction, a pile of like kind of a slow burn mystery is basically what I'm going to call those. I don't know if they are considered literary mystery or I don't really know, but for me, it's just like one of the best genres and I don't really know how to explain it. And then I have like a contemporary section, which one of them is definitely like rom-com. The others are more, I don't know, just more contemporary. I'm not really sure how to describe them. All of them in that category are considered Christian fiction, so like a Christian contemporary category. And then my nonfiction, which like I said is not included in the 12, but I am going to share a small stack of nonfiction with you. So these aren't in favorite order, although I will say I have a favorite fiction of the year and a favorite nonfiction of the year. Other than that, these are just my top favorites. They're not in any particular order. So we'll go ahead and get started, probably with historical fiction. All right, another way that I was able to work in multiple books is I am sharing one series and I'm counting that as one book. I did read 3 books in this series in 2024, which is saying a lot because I don't read series. I don't complete series hardly ever. I am current in this series. There are still books coming out, but that just never happens. The fact that I read 3 books in one series in 1 year is a huge deal. So that series is the Timeless series by Gabriel Meyer. So I read the first book last year, well, in 2023, and it was on my favorites list. So I'm not surprised that I enjoyed the rest of the series. I will say that the middle 2, so that's these 2, this one is the second one in this moment, this is the third one for a lifetime, they were my favorites. I just read Across the Ages, which is book number 4, and I only gave this one 4 stars, but I still just love this series so much. So I wanted to feature the entire series in my favorites because, like I said, it's such a big deal that I read all of them in this year. So these are the 3 that I read in 2024. If you don't know anything about this series, like I said, start with When the Day Comes. This is a Christian historical time travel. It is just so good. I am so impressed by how much work she put into the time travel aspect. Like, it just makes sense. It makes sense, and it's about time travel. And also, I really love her historical elements and how much she researches historical things, and just, I love reading her author notes. Like, she is a historian, you can tell, and I just love these books. Also, the faith content in them, it's so good. it's just so good. It's not cheesy or surface level. It's just really, really good faith content, really good history, and good time travel. So there's just nothing that I can say bad about these. The only thing that I have noticed, and I want to say this because I don't want you to get discouraged if you start, that in the beginning, basically with all of them, it took me a little bit to kind of get my attention or get I guess my bearings on the two different timelines. So if that's hard at first, just stick with it because it's so worth it, and they are so good. Okay, the next one on my list of historical fiction is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. I feel like everyone has read this, except for me, until I read it and loved it so much. I had heard really nothing but good things about this book, and it was so good. Kristen Hanna just writes really good historical fiction. I've only read 2 of her books, but I feel like I can confidently say that. I just love the way she wrote this story. I love how thick it was, honestly, because I loved spending all of that time getting to know the characters and just the way she made me feel. I cried, like sobbed, like heavy crying when I read this book, especially towards the end. It was so impactful. It's definitely heavy, as a lot of the historical fiction on my list is, because it's talking about war and things, you know, that are hard to deal with. So this is set in France. Yes. So this is set in France during World War II, during the occupation, following 2 sisters. It was just so good. We do have some like dual timeline things going on. So we have some flashbacks to the present day or the 90s, or, you know, some sort of more current timeline. But this book was so good. So good. I just loved it. I did read this with my in-person book club, and the discussions about this were so good. I feel like she did a really good job at writing historical fiction and like capturing the kind of, I don't know, the people of that time. Like, I felt like it was very well done in that aspect, like capturing the greatest generation and the way they do things. And I really just loved the characters, the plot, how like much it made you think. And yeah, I just really thought that this book was done really well. Like I said, it's very heavy, so check trigger warnings if that's something that you're concerned about. There is an essay scene, and there's also like death, a lot of death, child death. Yeah, very a lot going on. So I think on Goodreads I may have those listed if you want to check there. If not, just check into it, and if you have any questions about it, reach out and I will refresh my memory on the certain things that are in here. But this was such a good book, and I'm so glad I finally read it. All right, the next 2 are actually books that I read in December. So I was shocked that I had so many amazing favorite 5-star reads in December. Like, that was just awesome. So I'm gonna go ahead and share these. So the first one is A Girl Called Samson by Amy Harmon. This is my first Amy Harmon, and it definitely won't be the last. This is following a girl named Deborah Samson who, this is set during the Revolutionary War, and she decides to join the fight and pretend to be a boy. And this is actually based on a real woman. I think her name is actually Deborah Samson, and I loved this book. I buddy read this with Kelly at Kelly Reads a Lot, and it was so much fun to buddy read it. But I just loved the topics that came up about like womanhood and the spirit of America, and like, but also the hard parts of the Revolutionary War and what the soldiers and young people had to deal with, what the generals had to deal with. Just so much good stuff in this book. There is a love story in it, it did get slightly spicier than I would prefer, in just like one scene, I think, but I could overlook it because the rest of this book was so good. And it wasn't like a full-on open door scene. It was just a little bit much for my preference. So anyway, I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed, again, the discussion about it, the author's note, learning more about this real woman who did this and fought for our country. Anyway, this was so good. I highly recommend it. If you like historical fiction, if you haven't read it, if you like Amy Harmon and you haven't read it, I definitely recommend this one. Okay, the next one is Only the Beautiful by Susan Meisner. This one I also read in December, right after I finished A Girl Called Samson, and I couldn't believe that I read 2 amazing 5-star historical fiction books in a row. Like, that's so fun for me. And I love Susan Meisner, so I'm not really surprised that this was 5 stars. But I loved this book so much. So this is set at the like early beginning of World War II. And we're kind of jumping timelines, and it's kind of complicated to explain, but there's 2 parts to the story, so 2 different perspectives. So the first half of the book is from one perspective, and that is Roseanne, I think is her name, and she is the vine dresser's daughter for a vineyard, and her family is killed in an accident, and she is the only survivor. So she goes to live with the vineyard owners. She's 16, so it's just a couple of years until she's an adult, and she has synesthesia, which I thought was a really cool part of this story, to just get some look into that. At the time, they didn't know it was synesthesia, so she was kind of trying to hide that. Her parents didn't really want her to talk about it because people didn't understand what that was. So if you don't know, synesthesia is where people hear sound and see like colors and shapes, mostly colors. But anyway, so she has synesthesia. She's trying to kind of keep that secret, but she ends up sharing it a little bit, and she ends up pregnant. So just like the other 2 historical fiction that I read, this does get a little, I'm saying spicier. It has a little bit more description in that area than I would like in one scene, only one scene in this, again. So it wasn't a huge deal to me, but I do want to say that just in case that's something that you are trying to avoid. You can kind of check into the details or ask me about it if you want to. But anyway, so she's pregnant, she has synesthesia, people find out, and she gets sent away, and so much happens there. So in part 2, we're following Helen, and she is the sister of the vineyard owner, and during all of this time she has lived in Vienna, and so she returns, I don't know if it's like after World War II, I guess, kind of. I don't remember exactly the time period. She returns to the United States after witnessing some pretty terrible things in Vienna that happened with Hitler in World War II. And she returns and then finds out what happened to Rosanna. And she was really like fond of Rosanna when she met her when she was a child, and so she is like on this mission to find her and find out what happened to her and the baby. And anyway, I loved this story so much. It was very good. It did talk a lot about eugenics and things like that, and I thought it was just really great that it brought that to light, how that was kind of at the core of Hitler's beginning, the eugenics movement, and then also how things were going on in the United States at that same time, dealing with eugenics and the way we treated people who were different and had things we didn't understand, like synesthesia. So I just really loved this book. I think it's important, and I really, really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend it. And also, it is so beautiful. I just love this cover. Okay, the last historical fiction on my list is actually a middle grade. It's the only middle grade on my favorites list, but it was so good. And just everything I love about historical fiction, making me think, helping me learn about parts of history that I don't know about. So that one is The Lost Year by Catherine Marsh. So this is set in Ukraine, but it is dual timeline. We're getting some of a current setting from 2020, so it actually has a lot of like COVID type, not a lot, but a time period where like at the peak of COVID, and from a child's perspective, so like being isolated and what's going on there. I loved that part. But the Ukraine timeline is dealing with the famine in Ukraine, and wow, this book was so good. Definitely very emotional and very sad, obviously, with that topic. And I would be very hesitant to give this to like a young middle grader, but I think for a more mature and older teenager, this would be very impactful, as long as they're not like super sensitive, because there is death, child death, starvation, just like really hard things in this book. But I really loved it, and I just felt like I learned so much, and I had so much compassion and feeling, and I love learning from historical fiction, and I definitely did in this one. So this was a favorite. Definitely recommend. Okay, now we're gonna move on to some mystery. So like I said in the beginning, I have this, I think it's like a subgenre. I don't really know. I just really like atmospheric mysteries that sometimes are kind of a slow burn mystery, or like, to me, this is my cozy mystery. So I don't typically enjoy the typical cozy mysteries, but these are like my comfort mystery reads. So it's hard to explain exactly what they are, but I would say they're primarily a very atmospheric, very kind of like wilderness strong, or like a lot of descriptions about nature, and a good slow burn mystery. So the first one is Middletide by Sarah Crouch. This was her debut, and I loved it. It's a short, very good mystery, very atmospheric, very character driven. That's another thing I like in these books, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm gonna have a hard time with the synopsis on this one, actually kind of all of these, but this is also like non-linear timeline, which I think that I actually really enjoy, but I know not everybody enjoys like that dual timeline or non-linear timeline. I really liked that because I like getting like flashbacks and learning information and kind of trying to piece it together, I guess. I was able to predict the ending on this one, and I did feel like I could have had more at the end, or more explanation, or it could have been maybe better, but I really loved this, and this gave me like that feeling that I wanted, because when I picked this up, just by the cover and maybe the synopsis, I thought it reminded me of Kimmy Cunningham Grant, and her book These Silent Woods was my favorite from last year, probably still like my top favorite, and this really delivered in that. Like it didn't replace that, but it delivered in that same feeling, the atmosphere, the character development, and the mystery. So I really enjoyed this. So this is following a male main character, what's his name? Elijah Leith, and he basically like grew up in this small town, fell in love as a teenager, but wanted to like go away to the city and become a writer. He, I think, went to college and promised this girl that he would come back in a couple of years, and he didn't. And so he becomes a writer, and then he ends up struggling later on in his like 30s with his writing, and has to return to his hometown and to the property where his parents lived. And anyway, I think it's like a few years after he returns, a local doctor is found hanging in a tree on his property. And so they're investigating it. It's on his property, so he is being kind of accused, I think. Anyway, so he's trying to figure out what happened. We're following some perspective of the sheriff in town, who's like about to retire. Nothing bad ever happens in this town, and now he has to investigate this. It was so good. I really liked it. It was set in, I think, the Pacific Northwest, and I loved the setting. I loved the wilderness, the river, things like that. Like, I really, really enjoyed that part of it. So if you like that kind of slow burn mystery, I feel like the kind of mysteries that I enjoy probably aren't for everyone, because they are a little slow, little character driven. I read this really quickly though, so maybe I'm wrong about that, but I don't know. It's not like a thriller, I guess. So, to me. So, but I recommend this if that sounds good to you. The next one that is very similar is The Nature of Disappearing by Kimmy Cunningham Grant. So, I don't remember when I read this, but a lot of it has left my memory, and that makes me sad. And I almost took it off of this list when I was rearranging, but I was reading my review and I really did like it at the time, and I do remember some of it and remember the good parts and remember what I liked. It just didn't top The Silent Woods for me, which was her book that I read last year and my favorite of hers, my favorite of all time. So it still was really good, very atmospheric, very character driven, a mystery that I did not guess, and I just really enjoyed it. So this is following Emlyn? Yes. So Emlyn is our main character, and she is living kind of like out on this nature reserve or something. She's living in the wilderness, but she has some people around her and friends. She's living like in an RV. I think she's like doing guided like fishing and hunting, whatever that's called. Anyway, she like goes into the coffee shop or somewhere and sees on the news that one of her former like best friends is missing. So this former best friend, Janessa, is like a van life influencer who's traveling around in her van, and she is missing. Like, she hasn't been seen on social media for a while, and people can't get a hold of her, and so they're starting to wonder what's going on. Anyway, so this is like flashing back again. We're in some dual timelines, some non-linear things, to their friendship and kind of what happened there, why they're no longer best friends. And then also Emlyn is trying to find out what has happened to Janessa. So also in the midst of that, her former boyfriend shows up to get her to help him to find Janessa, because they were all friends. So we're dealing a lot with that relationship with her former boyfriend. I think they were actually engaged, if I'm remembering. So her and her former possibly fiance are trying to find Janessa, and so then we're getting flashbacks to see what happened in their relationship. Anyway, now that I'm wrapping this up, I really did like this book and I kind of want to reread it. So anyway, definitely recommend anything by Kimmy Cunningham Grant. If you haven't read These Silent Woods, please go do that first before you even read this one, because it is so good. Next in this mystery category is What Happens Next by Christina Suzanne Nelson, and she is a Christian author. This is published by Bethany House, so this is considered like a Christian mystery. Again, multiple points of view, multiple timelines. This is following a girl who I've completely forgotten her name, but Faith is her name, and she is recently divorced. She has children. I don't remember how old she is, but I liked kind of that aspect of the story. And she makes a podcast that's not really like a true crime podcast. It's basically following people who tragic things have happened to and what happens next, like what they have done with their life, like how they've moved on, or what has happened after the fact. So she gets contacted to help kind of investigate the disappearance of her childhood friend. So when she was 10 years old, she went to live with her grandma in this small town and formed this really close friendship. I think they were just there for like the summer or a school year, but she formed this really close friendship with the neighbor girl, and then they moved away. She, I think, wrote a few letters but didn't hear back, but they were 10 and she just kind of moved on and thought, that's what happens. But so she finds out as an adult that friend went missing like right after they moved, and that's why she never heard from her. And she never knew about it. I don't remember the time period. I think it was the 80s or 90s. Probably the 80s. Maybe even the 70s. I don't know. But she didn't know about it. So she's just finding out. So she returns to this town and is trying to figure out what happened to her friend. And another big part of this story, another perspective, is the friend's mom. So she, many years later, is still having a really hard time dealing with her daughter's disappearance. She hasn't done anything to her room. Like, she just still really has hope that her daughter will be found or will come home. And her whole family is really struggling to try to like pull her out of this and like help her to like have closure and move on. And that's why they're asking Faith for help. So anyway, this book was so good. It really was very character driven. One of the perspectives in this is actually the 10-year-old girl who goes missing, which I was nervous about because I don't know, I was just nervous that it would get too dark for me, or too graphic, but it ended up being fine. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed that part. And like I said, the mom's perspective, I don't remember her name, Dora. I just really liked how this book handled grief and especially that kind of like that unknown, like when someone went missing and you don't know how to move on because you don't really have the closure. Anyway, this was so good. I highly recommend it. Very, very good. I will read more from Christina Suzanne Nelson. Okay, the last one in this category is actually the only book on my list. No, there's 2 books on my list that I don't own a physical copy of, and this one is The Unmaking of June Farrow. This one really surprised me. I don't know why. I just wasn't expecting it to be like an all-time favorite, but I'm so glad that I read it. It is also, I'm putting it in this category because it's very mysterious. It is like jumping around in time and timelines, and it's atmospheric, and the character development is really good. So it just reminds me of like this type of book that I'm looking for. So there is a little bit of magical realism in this one as well. So this is following June Farrow. She is from this line of women who basically all start to kind of go crazy or have like mental health things come up, and they're in a small town and everybody like looks at them weird and they're not welcome places. And anyway, at the very beginning, her grandma has passed away. She doesn't have a relationship with her mom. Her mom actually disappeared when she was a baby, and she does have a really good friend, male friend, and then older woman who was like friends with her grandma, who are kind of her support system. But she starts to kind of see these visions, and that's like the beginning of the like going crazy things. So this book was so good. It had a really good romance, a really good like just parenting and like a motherhood theme in it. Anyway, I really enjoyed it. I loved like the mystery. I loved the magical realism part. It was just a really, really good fun time for me, so I recommend this one as well. But my next section is Christian Contemporary. That's what I'm gonna call it. So let's get started on those. The first one is Della and Darby by Susanna B. Lewis. So this is my second book by Susanna B. Lewis, and last year her book also made it on my favorites, so I think it's safe to say I should read everything that she writes. This one is just like a Christian contemporary kind of slice of life story about these twin sisters. It is multiple POV, so we're following both sisters and their grandma Birdie, who raised them. So I just really loved this book. I did tab it. This was like the first book that I annotated, and so I have like relatable moments, Southern quotes. There was a lot of Southern quotes in here, especially from Grandma Birdie. She said all sorts of things like hot as blue blazes, and okay, I'm gonna have to look some up because it was a lot, but I loved it. Let's see, what color is that? Heavens to Betsy, that was there a lot. I have a lot of Heavens to Betsy's marked. As nervous as a long-tailed cat in a full room of rockers. So many things. I just really love this story. It's very character driven. Like I said, there is a little bit of a plot, a little kind of romance, a little mystery in it, but it's just overall just a good contemporary family story, and I really enjoyed it. I just had such a good time. I highly recommend this one and her other book, Bless Your Heart, Ray Sutton. Also very Southern, very character driven, with some good faith elements in it too. So I really enjoyed this. The next one is basically the only romance on my list. Well, that's not true, but the only like rom-com, I guess. And that is Cole and Laila Are Just Friends by Bethany Turner. This book I love so much. Like, if you were to ask me, give me a rom-com, what's your favorite rom-com, this is going to be the one for sure. So this is following Cole and Laila. They are, I think they just turned 40. They've been best friends like their whole life, or since at least middle or high school, and neither one of them are married, and they've never really dated, I don't think. Anyway, there's a lot going on in their lives. Cole, I think his grandpa just passed away. I hope I'm remembering that right. And there's like kind of a little mystery with his grandpa's will, and what does he do? Is he a chef, or is she a chef? Somebody cooks food. I don't remember who it is. Anyway, that doesn't really matter. This book is so sweet. The way these two characters cared about each other was just so sweet, so beautiful. I loved it. So this is Thomas Nelson. I don't think there was really any faith content in this book, but the friendship, the way they loved each other, the way they cared about each other was just so sweet. I loved it so much. And just kind of the way the romance starts to develop and the way they communicate with each other about it and the way they handle it. I don't know. I just loved it. Like, my heart, I just loved it so much. This was my favorite kind of like rom-com fun romance. I just loved it. I don't know what else to say. There's a ton of like pop culture references in this book. That's definitely Bethany Turner's thing, and it's also set in New York City, so, and it's Laila's first time, maybe Cole's, but I know Laila's, I think, like, first time being there. Like, they're out of their like normal, they're from Colorado, so they're like out of their normal atmosphere, so like they're doing like all sorts of touristy things in New York City, and I really liked that aspect too. Like, it was just so fun. Okay, the last book on my list and my top favorite fiction book from 2024 is The Masterpiece by Francine Rivers. So this is, I guess, a contemporary romance, you would say, by Francine Rivers. But it was so good and so rich, like amazing faith content in it. There is spiritual warfare, which I was afraid of, to be honest. Like, I didn't know if I wanted to read about that, but I didn't mind it. I just really thought this story was done so well. The faith content in this was so good. The love story was so good. I don't know, just the way she wrote it. It also jumps around in time periods, which is obviously something that I like. But we get like flashbacks to these two people's childhoods. Like, there was so much trauma in this book, so check the triggers. So much trauma for these two people, but what the Lord did in their lives, and it's so good. I don't even want to tell you anymore other than just go read it. So I think the main character is Grace. So I know there's Roman. Yes, okay. Single mom also. Trope. I hope that's not a spoiler. I don't think so. So yes, Roman is like this famous artist. He's very wealthy, and he is looking for like an assistant, I think. And Grace is a young mom, and she is looking for a job. And so she gets hired by Roman, and Grace is a believer and Roman is not. And they both had very, very traumatic childhoods. I know I already said that, but I just want to reiterate. That part was very hard, definitely got me crying pretty heavily and in my feelings a lot while reading this, but I think that's part of why I just love it so much, because it felt so real and relatable and just so good. Anyway, that's all I'm gonna say. This was my favorite fiction book of the year, and you should read it if you haven't already. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some nonfiction. So I wasn't going to include nonfiction. I don't think I had any nonfiction on my list last year of my 12 favorite books. So I wasn't going to include nonfiction, even though I read some good ones, some 5 stars. But the very last book, I think, that I finished for the year in December was so good. Like, it was like up there with The Masterpiece as far as like favorite book of the year. So I felt like I had to include it, but then I was having trouble moving books around and fitting it. So I just decided to share nonfiction favorites and my top nonfiction favorite. So I'm gonna start with The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. If you don't know what this is Corrie ten Boom's memoir, pretty much. Her and her family were watchmakers in World War II and were hiding Jewish people, and her and her sister ended up in a concentration camp, and just so many things happened in her life. But she was such a strong believer. Her sister, wow, had incredible faith and hope in the Lord despite terrible things happening, and this book was so good. It was really good, and just really, I was surprised how much of it was going to be like her talking about her sister, because her sister really did have just this incredible faith and resilience, and that made an impact on Corrie's life, and then Corrie went on to do these amazing things, and this was such a good book. So if you haven't read it, I definitely recommend it. Next one is The Day the World Came to Town by Jim DeFeed. This is a nonfiction that is basically telling a bunch of different stories about the people who were on airplanes coming most of them are coming like back to the United States when the attack happened on 9/11, and they were rerouted to Gander, Newfoundland, because they could no longer enter US airspace. And so this is just following a bunch of different people's stories and kind of like the hospitality and love that the people in Gander were showing to these people. And I can't remember the length of time they were there, but I want to say it was like at least a week, maybe not. And they all kind of had different time frames, but it was a really impactful book and just really neat story and different story. I read this in September, and I just enjoyed it. And I thought it was like, there were heavy parts, obviously, because some of these people couldn't get a hold of their family members or didn't know if they were okay. And but it was also very like heartwarming, just because of the way they came together and the way the community cared for them and brought them in. It was just really sweet. So I definitely recommend this one. The next nonfiction is Honest Faith by Charles Spurgeon. So this was my first Spurgeon, and I'll definitely be reading more. I really enjoyed this. This is a short little book. I have it on my Kindle, so I don't have a physical copy, but it's just basically all about faith and doubts and dealing with that. And I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was just full of great things. It was a read along with Tiffany at Beautiful Minutia. There's some videos on her channel, I think once a week, that kind of go through this book. So if you want to read it and you want to go watch those, that was really helpful for me. I think it made the experience that much better. Also, the Hiding Place was a read along with Krista from Books and Jams. So there's also videos on Krista's channel to go along with this one. Anyway, Honest Faith was really good. I definitely want to read more from Spurgeon, and I was glad to read that and watch the videos. So Tiffany had Dia from Novel Idea and Chrissy from Chrissy's Purple Library on those live chats, and I just really loved their commentary and listening to them as well. So now we are to my favorite nonfiction of 2024, and that is Holier Than Thou by Jackie Hill Perry. I can't say enough about this book. It is so good. So good. So if you don't know who Jackie Hill Perry is, she wrote Gay Girl Good God. I think that's probably what she's like most known for, maybe. But then her and her husband also have a podcast. I think it's called Meet the Perrys, and they have like a YouTube channel, and that is really good too. And this book is all about the holiness of God, and it's nothing about Jackie Hill Perry. Like, I think that's why I loved it so much. Not that I don't love her, like I do like her. I really like the way that she talks about her faith and about God and about the Bible. But what I really loved about this book is that she doesn't talk about herself at all. I mean, I can't remember a single part of it that she talked about her or her own experience. Like, this book is about God. And it's not like it's pointing you to God's word the whole time. She does reference a lot of other authors and theologians. So there's a lot of like footnotes, a lot of references, and I enjoyed that because I felt like she was like condensing all this information that she had been studying. She was condensing it and just speaking in a very easy to read, no frills. This book is not long. I spent a lot of time reading it. It's 168 pages. I mean, I ran out of tabs, so I have stuff marked up in here. I mean, I think I have pen marks on almost every single page in this book. It is so good. And it just made me think so much about God's holiness and what that means, and just being like in awe of that. And also it kind of just took me out of myself, like took me away from thinking about God and heaven in like view of myself, and more of just him and his holiness. And I don't even know how to explain how this book made me feel or how it made me think. I wish I could share everything I marked, but like we would be here all day. Oh, by the way, this is a gift from Amanda, so thank you, Amanda, because I'm so glad that I read this, and I think that everyone should read it. And so at the very beginning, she's really just talking about God's holiness and how basically that means that if God is holy, then he cannot sin against us. He can't do anything like sinful towards us, which seems very obvious, but I think it really like challenges the way we go about our lives, and the way, me personally, the way I think about things that are happening. I'm gonna quit rambling because I'm saying absolutely nothing. But you should read this book. You should read this book. I don't care who you are. You should read this book. So those are all of the books on my favorites list for 2024. I hope that you were encouraged to maybe pick some of these up. I hope that you had a wonderful reading year in 2024. If you have a video, tell me down below. If I haven't watched it, I will go watch it. If you don't have a channel or don't have a video, please tell me what your favorite book was in 2024. I would love to hear about it. I do plan to, again this year, do a video where I take each one of my favorite books and pick out a book, hopefully from my shelves, but if not, just pick out a book that kind of reminds me of that book in some way. I did this last year with my favorites. I picked out 12 books that I wanted to read in the year. I did read all of those, which that's so exciting that I actually did that. And actually some of those were on my favorites list, so quite a few. So I think that was a good way to plan like my 12 books for the next year, by looking at my favorites and picking something that I felt like was similar, either in genre, author, just something about it. Could be anything about it, but that was a good strategy for me this past year. So I do plan on doing that again. I'm actually really excited to go through my books, look at these books, and pick out that list. I haven't done it yet, so I'm so excited to do that, and I will be sharing that in a video sometime soon. So you can look forward to that. I hope you are having a wonderful new year. I forgot to say Happy New Year, but this is the first video that I'm posting in 2025. So Happy New Year. I pray that you feel the love of Jesus, and yeah, that you just have great things coming up in this year. And thank you so much for watching this video, for being here on my channel. I appreciate you so much. Have a good day. Bye.